hour till 9, till 10 for you.
Okay.
If you're 5 minutes later, it's not no problem.
Hij is er bijna.
One moment, you have to start Facebook.
Ja, het is live.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll wait.
Yeah, you can start.
Okay. First of all, Shalom Aleichem again. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me again to speak. And like usual, I would like to commit this evening's shir to the memory of Shoshana Bas Yitzchak, the mother of Danny Jacobs and the wife of Paul Jacobs, both of which I know. And like I said, I remember her. I met her several times in Netanya, definitely. So Tehei Nishmas Tzura B'Tzur HaChaim, and no doubt that all the Torah that is being learned and studied in the context of this program is a source of Ilui Neshama.
Oh man, I don't think so. You met her in Netanya. You met her in Bornwood.
I remember
there in Netanya.
Oh,
You're sure? I think
Sure, she died 3 years ago.
I mean,
I wouldn't have met her in Netanya.
I don't think so. It doesn't matter.
I remember meeting
In Bornwood. I don't know. You remember?
I'll tell you why. I
I
remember when I met her.
Yes.
I met her at a kiddush of the shul. I met her at the
Okay.
kiddush. And in my, I could be wrong, but in my memory, it was in the Netanya kiddush.
Doesn't matter.
This week, Wednesday, it starts tomorrow night. Will be Rosh Chodesh Av.
Bogilovski art, as well somewhere, I don't know.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to ask if everybody can mute themselves so we can hear the rabbi speak.
Yes. I moved everybody. Yes. Now, I did it.
It's Rosh Chodesh Av this week, Wednesday, starting Tuesday night. And I thought I would explore a few of the themes which are associated with how we practice our mourning during these days. Mourning, not boker, not M-O-R, but mourning, M-O-U-R, avelut. And almost everything which I'm going to say today is based on the teachings of Rav Soloveitchik. So the first point I'd like to make is a distinction which we find in halacha. It's very interesting. There is a concept called avelus chadasha and a concept called avelus yeshana. Avelus Chadasha is a new mourning. Again, mourning not as in boker, but in the idea of mourning a tragedy. Paul, how do you translate mourning to?
Grieving.
Grieving. Avelus Chadasha is if, God forbid, there's a new reason to be for Avelut. What could be a new reason? If someone in 2020, Chas v'Shalom, passes away, that's a new event, and therefore it's a new Avelus Chadasha. We have that in Judaism. We know, we sit Shiva, Chas v'Shalom. Everything that we practice in Hilchot Avelut has to do with Avelus Chadasha. But there's also Avelus Yeshana, an old Avelut. That's what we do during the month of Av, and even before, from the 17th day of Tammuz. Avelus Yeshana means we're mourning not for something new that's happening, but for something that happened a long time ago. Yeshana, it's old. So we have every type of avelus that we have in halacha is either an avelus yeshana, mourning for something that happened a long time ago, or avelus chadasha, mourning for something new. And what we find, fascinatingly, is that we observe mourning for both types of avelus the same way. Halacha doesn't tell us to mourn for an avelus chadasha and to mourn for an avelus yeshana in a different way. On the contrary, halacha tells us the same way we observe avelut for something new, the same way we're going to observe avelut for an old historical event. And before I get into the details, this is a fascinating idea, because what we're learning over here is that in our set of values, a Jewish person's relationship to time is very sophisticated. Rav Soloveitchik tells us that for a Jew, time isn't just the past, the present, and the future. Time is much more complicated. The past can relive itself in the present. That's what we have on Pesach. Chayav Adam Liroy says, Atzmai ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. On Pesach night, we're not sharing a story that happened. We're experiencing a story that's happening. And so a Jew lives with a very, very sensitive appreciation of the past in the present, and a very highlighted anticipation of the future in the present as well. Emunah, faith in the times of Mashiach or Tchias HaMesim or of the future is brought to the present on a daily basis. So therefore, because our relationship with time is much more sophisticated than a simple division of past, present, and future, we can mourn for events that took place a long time ago with the same degree of intensity that we mourn for events that took place very recently. The Rav says that in Avelus Chadasha, and I'm starting with Avelus Chadasha because it's what's most familiar to us. Avelus Chadasha, the period of mourning, is separated into three categories. The first category is the Shiva, what we know. The Shiva is the time right after the burial of a relative, where the Avelim, like we know, they stay at home and they sit on the floor. They don't wear leather shoes. They don't take showers. They'll wear torn clothing. And they accept menachamim. They accept people who come to offer condolence. That's the period of the Shiva. We know this, l'tzarenu. On the seventh morning of the Shiva, we get up from Shiva. And then we go into a period called the Shloshim. During the period of a Shloshim, we're still Avelim, but it's already different. We're allowed to go to work. We don't have to stay in the house. We're allowed to sit on a chair. But there are things that we don't do. We still don't take haircuts. We don't shave, etc. There's a period called the Shloshim. After the Shloshim, if it's for a parent, the period of mourning continues into a third stage, and that is Yud Beis Chodesh, 12 months. And only after the third category, 12 months, is complete, does the mourning end. That's the gradual process of Avelus Chadasha, of mourning for something new. Shiva, Shloishim, and Yud Beis Chodesh. The Rav says that for Avelus Yeshana, we have the same exact 3 categories. We have the first category is I should say maybe the third category is the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks which start on the 17th day of Tammuz and will continue until after the 9th day of Av, 3 weeks. The halachas of mourning already begin during the 3 weeks. Then we have a second category, and that is the category of the 9 days, which begin on Rosh Chodesh Av. A lot of the halachas which don't apply during the 3 weeks begin to apply during the 9 days, or it could be brought into Shavua Shechalbo, the week of Tish Above. But there's a second category that's in between the 3 weeks and Tish Above itself. And then there's the third category, which is Tish Above itself. And the Rav says that each category corresponds to another. So when we, Chas v'Shalom, sit Shiva for an Avelus Chadasha, for a relative, that corresponds to Tish Above itself. On Tish Above, the halachas are very similar. We don't sit on a chair. We sit on the floor. We don't shower on Tish Above. We don't wear leather shoes. It's very similar. What we do on Tish Above is very similar to the practice which is common during a Shiva. The 9 days which precede Tish Above, which is going to start on Wednesday, that corresponds to the Shloshim. No music, no haircuts. And the 3 weeks which start on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz correspond to the Yud Bet Chodesh, the 12 months that we practice for a parent after the Shloshim. So just to summarize, going back, the 12 months which we observe in Avelus Chadasha correspond to the 3 weeks which begin on the 17th of Tammuz. The Shloshim, the 30 days in Avelus Chadasha, correspond to the 9 days in Avelus Yeshana. And again, the halachas are very similar. And then finally, the period of Shiva for Avelus Chadasha corresponds to Tish Above in an Avelus Yeshana. There's only one fundamental difference between the two, and that is the process. In an Avelus Chadasha, we start with the more intense type of Avelus, sitting on the floor, the Shiva, and then gradually we get up from the Shiva to the Shloshim and to the Yud Beis Chodesh. For an Avelus Yeshana, this process is reversed. First, we have the less intense Avelus, the 3 weeks. Then we get into the more intense during the 9 days, no wine, no meat. And then we get into the even more intense Avelus of Tish Above, which is, like I said, the highest degree of Avelus and Avelus Yeshana. And the reason why the processes are reversed, Meir, I'll take your question in 1 minute. The reason why the processes are reversed are very simple. In Avelus Chadasha, it's so fresh in our lives, it's so real, that we don't have to psychologically get into the mood. It happens, we're shocked, so we feel it. And then slowly but gradually, the halacha guides us slowly away from the Avelus. Whereas in Avelus Yeshana, the process is reversed, because to go back and to relate to something which happened a long time ago is not an easy thing to do. So psychologically, the process is first, the Avelos is less intense, and then slowly but gradually, it becomes something which really touches us and moves us to the point that we could sit on the floor and recite Kinot during a night of crying. Yes, Mayor.
One question. Tijdens de Stages of Mourning is also that we have to sleep on the floor.
I'm
Is that
sorry?
You sleep on the floor
When?
during the time, the first day. And when you're sitting on the floor, you also have that night to sleep on the floor. You know something about that, or you don't know?
You're talking about during a Shiva?
Yes.
I have to look into it.
Okay.
I'll tell you, Mayor, it's something very interesting that in the halachot of Avelut, the customs vary from community to community in a way almost unprecedented in any other field of halacha. Avelut is all minhagim, and there are so many different minhagim. And so it's very possible that there is a minhag. I'll give you another example. There is a minhag, and it's written in the Sfarim. Not a lot of people know it. But if you have a choice, if you have two options, you could either visit a Shiva house in the beginning of the week or in the end of the week. So the minhag is, if you have both options, you should, and you need to choose one, you should try the end of the week. Not everyone knows this. So there's a lot of the last 3 days. There's a lot of minhagim that not everyone knows, but if it's possible that there is a minhag not to sleep on a bed, I would not be.
Yeah, it's the same that I wrote somewhere that some people are sleeping with the head on a stone instead of a pillow.
It's possible. I didn't read it.
Just I want to know.
Possible.
Thanks.
Before we continue, any questions, comments, arguments, suggestions, complaints, or concerns? Okay.
The only thing you haven't covered is the period of Onain.
Okay. Very good. We'll talk about that.
Okay.
We're going to
You told you don't have to shave you the last 9 days, but you have to shave you the whole 3 weeks. You can't shave you.
Yeah. So
maybe the other half, but
so you're 100% right.
thank you.
If one can, one should not take a haircut for the whole 3 weeks.
No, okay.
But the question is when we have to be lenient. If let's say someone's parnasa is that he has to look like
that's
a man.
something else. Yes.
So it's easier to be lenient during the 3 weeks than during the 9 days.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's a different degree of chomer. I'm going to address Danny's question about the onain later. Before that, I'd like to speak about what it means to be an avel, and then we'll see why there's a completely new category which Danny is mentioning called the onain. But let's pause now and let's explore what it means to be an avel. We think to be an avel means to sit and cry and mourn and cry and mourn and cry. But halacha teaches us something new. And I'd like to draw your attention to a few minhagim which we have. The first minhag is when we read Eicha. Eicha is the Megillah which we read on Tish Above. We read it on Tish Above night, and most communities also on Tish Above morning. But when we read it, we don't end the Megillah with the last pasuk of Megillah. We all know this. We come to the Megillah, the second to last pasuk of Eicha is the pasuk Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'Nashuva Chadesh Yomeinu Kekedem. Right? We say this in the Nigun. Hashiveinu Hashem Elecha V'noshuva. Chadesh Yomeinu Kekedem. Then, and this is a positive pasuk. We tell Hashem, bring us back and we'll return. We both want this relationship. It's a positive pasuk. But that's not how the Megillah ends. The Megillah continues. So the laner, the person who's reading the Megillah, finishes the Megillah out loud. Ki ima ois me'astanu, kotzafta oleinu, ad me'oid. This is the last pasuk of Eicha, and it's not a positive pasuk. Unless you have utterly rejected us and are exceedingly angry against us. This is how the Megillah ends. So the minhag is that after we finish reading the Megillah, the whole congregation goes back to the second to last pasuk, which, like I said, is positive, and we read the pasuk again. Hashiveinu Hashem Elecha V'noshuva, Chadesh Yomeinu Kekedem. So that we shouldn't end the Megillah of Eicha on a negative note. We want to end the Megillah on a positive note. I'll give you another example for a similar minhug, and that is during the kinos. The kinot, which we recite both on the night of Tish Above and during the day of Tish Above, and with the following text. We have the famous kina, which we sing. That's also the minhag in Holland.
Yes.
And then there's the whole debate about whether on Shabbat Chazon we sing Lechadoidi to this figure. What's the minhag in Holland?
The same.
You do
you sing
it.
the Chododi and that's it, Megan.
So it's a whole, in Halacha, there's a whole discussion. If it's his pasnisht on Shabbos Kodesh to have Avelus, Elit, but the Klal Yisrael, a lot of communities do this. They sing Lechadoidi to the tune of Elitzion. But after we finish the kinos, we don't stop. We start reciting psukim from Zechariah and Yeshayahu. And again, we're doing this still on Tish Above night and on Tish Above morning, not in the afternoon. In the night and the morning when we're still sitting on the floor. We don't finish the kinot negatively. We start reading psukim. Lochein koyamar Hashem, shavti Yerushalayim berachamim. I returned to Yerushalayim with compassion. Beisi yiboneba, my house, my home will be built in it. Num Hashem tzavokos, etc. Verses which continue from Zechariah and Yeshayahu, speaking about that the future won't be like the past, and there will be a positive future. So we end the kinos also on the night of Tish Above and in the morning of Tish Above positively. Now, some communities add kinot for the Holocaust.
Oh, we do.
And there's a discussion whether it's appropriate or not. But those that do, if you do say kinos for, again, I don't want to paskin for Holland. I'm not the Rav of Holland. Do you say, by the way?
Not yet. Yes, you say. In the evening. In the evening. Only in the evening.
So some people add it only in the end. In my humble opinion, one must add the new kinot for the Holocaust before these psukim. In the kinos that I'm holding, they added the kinos for the Holocaust after these psukim. I personally think it might not be appropriate. If one is already adding the kinnos for the Holocaust, they should go before the psukim, because the minhug of Klal Yisrael is to end the kinnot with these psukim, because we're supposed to end kinnot positively, not negatively, positively. Just like we end the Megillah of Eicha with a positive pasuk, we should also end the kinnot with positive psukim. Another example are the seven. Sorry,
but we stand up. Elitzion, we stand up, and that's the end.
Yeah, but then there's another kinna after Elitzion.
No, but we don't sit down anymore.
Shomron Kol, you don't say?
In Bournemouth, no. We
In Bournemouth. You stand for Elitzion, and then you could sit down for Shomron Kol. What you could do is you could add the Holocaust kinnos before Elitzion v'Oreha. So you do the kinnos for the Holocaust, then you stand up for Elitzion v'Oreha, and then you. But the reason why people don't want to do it is because it's like our generation is adding kinnot to the tradition, and I understand why people are uncomfortable doing that. But I'm saying if you're already doing it, you should do it before the psukim. There's another minhug, which is the 7 Halftoris after Tish Above. Between Tish Above and Rosh Hashanah, 7 weeks, we don't read a Haftarah that has to do with the Parsha. Rather, we read a Haftarah for 7 weeks after Tish Above. From Tish Above all the way till Rosh Hashanah, we read Haftarahs that have to do with offering passages in the Navi which offer comfort to Klal Yisrael. In other words, we don't stand up from Tish Above and finish. No, after Tish Above, we get into a positive period of comfort. What is the bracha of Tish Above? The bracha of Tish Above is inserted in the passage which we know in Shemona Esrei called Nachem, and it ends with the bracha. This is the main bracha of Tish Above. Baruch Ata Hashem Menachem Tzion Uboine Yerushalayim. Menachem Tzion Uboine. We're blessing Hashem not for destroying Jerusalem, but for, please God, building Jerusalem. So what we see over here, my dear friends, is this concept that Tish Above is shaped not only by crying, but also by anticipating the nechama, anticipating comfort, welcoming condolence, hoping and trusting that the future will be better. That's why we don't end the Megillah with the last pasuk. We go back and we say the second to last pasuk again, Hashivenu Hashem Eilecha. That's why we end with the kinot, with psukim from Yeshayahu and Zechariah, which offer comfort to the Jewish people. That's why after Tisha B'Av, for 7 weeks, we read a Haftarah that offers comfort to the Jewish people. That's why the bracha of Tisha B'Av speaks about Hashem comforting Zion and Yerushalayim. So Rav Soloveitchik explains that the halachic category of Avelos, what does it mean to be an Avel? It's a fascinating concept. Part of, says the Rav, part of the halachic requirement of being an Avel is to find comfort. Halachically, it's brilliant, and I think psychologically, it's brilliant. Halacha tells an Avel, when you're sitting and crying and mourning and grieving, you should also find the nechama. It's part of Avelos. You can't separate Avelos from nechama. Part of Avelos, part of mourning and grieving, halachically, is finding comfort. That's why on Tisha B'Av we find comfort. We finish Eicha on a comforting note. We finish the kinot on a comforting note. After Tish Above, we read comforting Halftoris. The bracha of Tish Above is about menachem. It's comforting. When a person sits shiva, what is the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to go to him. We call it to be menachem avel. The mitzvah is not to visit an avel. The mitzvah is to be menachem the avel. The mitzvah is to offer the avel comfort. Hamakom yenachem eschem. And the avel is required to accept the comfort. Everything about avelos, the mourning, the grieving, the weeping, the crying, is also about finding comfort. You can't separate. And avel's job is also to find comfort. And that's why on Tish Above, we find comfort. Says Rav Soloveitchik, that's why, and this goes back to Danny's original question, that's why there's a new halachic category called onein. What is an onein? Onein is before the burial. The time between when, God forbid, someone passes away and the burial. So during that time, a person is not an avel. A person doesn't sit shiva, nothing. A person is a new category called the onein. Why do we need a new category? Why can't a person, as soon as, God forbid, a relative passes away, you're an avel? Why do you have to wait till after the burial? Says the Rav, we have a concept in Pirkei Avos, Alta nachameu b'shah shemeisa imuta lefanav. Before the burial, when someone is just passed away, not yet buried, one cannot be comforted. It's too early, it's too fresh. Only after the burial and the closure and the Kaddish can one psychologically begin to find comfort. But before the burial, it's too early. It's not possible to find comfort. Says the Rav, because it's impossible psychologically to comfort someone before the burial, therefore halachically, he or she cannot be an avel. Because an avel is only someone who can also find comfort. Part of avelut is to find comfort. But when a person can't find comfort, one cannot be an avel. And so halacha creates a new category called an onein. Onein is not an avel. An onein is someone who is experiencing a loss which is so fresh and so early that he or she cannot be comforted. And because they can't be comforted, there's no avelos. Only when they can when they're in the process, when they can be comforted, only then do they become avelim. So that's why if someone goes, if chas v'sholem, there's a patira, and someone goes to visit the people are not avelim, they're an onein, you don't go in and say, Hamakim yenachem eschem, you're nice to them, but we don't offer words of comfort. So we see from here that part of the halachic category of avelus, of mourning, is finding comfort. And therefore, our entire mourning in avelus yeshana and avelus chadasha, the process of mourning, the process of observing Tish Above, all this is partnered with our halachic requirement to also find comfort. Any questions, comments, arguments, suggestions, complaints, or concerns?
So I have a question. Why is the time between the chas v'shulam, the passing of a person, and the time that the person is onen? Why do we Jews have to hurry up the the burial of the person, so that you could quick come in a state of to be comforted. Because if you say, because that's also a kind of stage, right? And
Yeah.
actually you should also have some time. So why do we Jews have to hurry up that
So few hours.
burial, and not wait like by the goyim? They wait a week or 2 weeks before they bury or do or cremate or something.
So I'll tell you, I want to tell you two things. I'm sure we could discuss this for a very long time, but I want to tell you two things. Number one, from my own personal experience, as someone who sat Shiva, and as someone who has been guiding people as a Rav for 10 years during Shiva, a short period of being an Onain does not affect a person's ability to find comfort. I personally did not find that people needed psychologically to wait for the burial. That's from what I've observed. But I want to tell you something much more important. Today we live in a world where we have freezers and refrigerators. I once watched an interview with someone in Tel HaShomer in Tel Aviv, who his job is he's in charge of the room in the hospital with the refrigerators for the people who have sadly passed away. It was a fascinating interview because it's a fascinating job. But for most of the time of halacha, we didn't have refrigerators. And the longer you kept a person not buried, I don't know how the Christians did it, but al pi derech hateva, the longer you kept a person not buried, the more degrading it was for the body. And so in my humble view, this is how this halacha evolved. Obviously, halacha, the Torah Moshe Misinai, but it's very simple that the longer you would wait, the longer the body wouldn't be kavod for the met. So for kavod ames, the halacha is that we have to bury as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Also, the idea of shmira, which some communities still practice today. If chas v'shalom, someone passes away in the evening, and the levaya is only the following morning. So there's a concept, it's a minhug of a shomer. Family members will be either next to the mace or next to the room of the mace all night saying Tehillim.
Right, yes.
Today, a lot of even very, very frum communities aren't makpid. But where did this come from? It's very simple. In those days, if a person's body wasn't in a refrigerator, and it was even in a mechubadik way on a table with towels or whatever it is, animals would come, mice would come, cats, I don't know, dogs, animals would come. So to protect the dignity of the mace, a person is alive, staying there all night, saying Tehillim, but making sure that animals don't come and harm the body of the mace. So a lot of we have to learn these halachas. I'm not saying chas v'shalom to change these halachas, but to appreciate them in the context of the history of how these halachas evolved.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd like to end off with the following observation. You know, I'm sure it's not a problem for most of the people who are with us this evening on this shir. But I can share with you something personal. When I was 16 years old, I spent the summer in Eretz Yisrael. I was born in Israel, but I grew up in Chutz La'aretz. And when I was 16, after a year, I was in Israel for a few months when I was 7 years old. And between the age of 7 and 16, I was never in Eretz Yisrael. And I came back in the summer. And I looked around me and I saw Yerushalayim that's built and Eretz Yisrael that's developed and the state. And I found it hard to appreciate as a 16-year-old why Tish Above is still relevant today. And a lot of people have this problem today. And you even hear voices of let's change the nusach of Nachem or Kinnas because it's a chutzpah to Hashem. And when Hashem gave you a beautiful city of Yerushalayim, you're sitting as if and pretending it's destroyed. People walk around with this problem. How in 2020, when Yerushalayim is rebuilt, how can we walk around crying as if it's destroyed? Now, before I answer this question, I just want to say that it's first of all, the Shechina isn't here. And even the Yerushalayim, it's never been more beautiful, the Yerushalayim of today, there's still a long way to go. And even though the state of Israel is a beautiful country, we still have a long way to go. But I want to approach the question a bit differently. And again, this is also from Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik taught a lot about Tish Above, so there's a lot to say in his name. And this is a fascinating idea, and I'd like to share this with you and to end today's shir based on this idea. We had in Jewish history 2 temples. We had Bayis Rishon, Bet Mikdash HaRishon, the first temple, and that was destroyed. And we went out to our first exile, the first Galut. And then a few decades later, the Persians allowed us to come back, and we built Beit Sheni, the second Beis HaMikdash. And that lasted for a while, and then finally, even the second Bais was destroyed. When was the first temple destroyed? On Tish Above. Beit Rishon was destroyed on Tish Above. When was Beit Sheni destroyed? Also on Tish Above. So on Tish Above today, we mourn, it's the anniversary of the destruction of both Batei Mikdash, both temples, Bais Rishon and Bais Sheni. So the Gemara asks, already during the first Golus, the first exile, which lasted only a few decades, the Jews had Tish Above. In Bavel, after Bais Rishon, the Jews already had Tish Above, because the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed on Tish Above. So when they were in the exile, they had Tish Above. Came Tish Above, they sat on the floor and they cried. Al Naharot Bavel, Shom Yoshavnu Gam Bochinu Bezochreinu Es Tzion. On the rivers of Babylon, the Jewish people mourned and cried when they remembered Zion. During the first Golus, we had Tish Above. The question is, after they came back, during the second Bais, during the second temple, what happened to Tish Above? It's a fascinating question. Correct me if I'm wrong. During the time of the second Bet HaMikdash, we already had Tish Above for the first Bet HaMikdash. Now the second Beis HaMikdash is standing. It's rebuilt. What happened to Tish Above? Rav Soloveitchik argues that according to the Rambam, that's how the Rav Soloveitchik reads the Rambam, according to the Rambam, during the second Beis Hamikdash, Tish Above was observed. The second Beis Hamikdash stood. The Kohanim served. The Leviim sang. And Tish Above came. When the Beis Hamikdash is standing, Tish Above came and everyone sits on the floor to sit and cry. And on Tish Above morning, after the Kohanim finished their avodah during the second Beis Hamikdash, they would join the rest of Klal Yisrael, sit on the floor, and observe Tish Above. Says Rav Soloveitchik, how could this be? And he answers that Tish Above is not only mourning the past, it's also praying for the future. During the second Beis Hamikdash, the Jewish people observed Tish Above as a form of prayer, to hope, to daven, that the second Beis Hamikdash won't be destroyed like the first was. Tish Above is not just history, remembering the past, it's praying for the future. They sat on the floor in Tish Above, observing Tish Above in a prayer that this second bias won't be destroyed. And the truth is, they had a good reason to pray, because it was destroyed. Says the Rav, when we observe Tish Above today, it's not only to cry for the past, it's to daven to Hashem that we won't lose what we have gained. And if, Baruch Hashem, we live in a world where we do have a bit of a Yerushalayim, and we do have Eretz Yisrael, we sit on Tish Above davening that we won't lose what we've gained recently. Because a nation, and this is a nation that doesn't learn from the mistakes of its past, will repeat it. Will repeat the mistakes. And therefore, Tish Above is not only to remember the past, it's to learn from the past and to try to ensure that we won't make the same mistakes. So Tish Above is relevant today as it ever was. Just like the Jews during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash observed Tish Above as a prayer that the second bais won't be destroyed, we should also observe Tish Above as a prayer that we won't lose what we've already gained.
What do we say on the end of the prayer of Tish Above at night? Ashivenu Hashem Aleichem en
Ja, dat hebben we.
Ofenu
Dat is, jij was te laat, dat hebben we al gezegd in het begin.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I told him he's later, he wasn't in time.
Okay.
And he's right.
Okay.
Any questions, comments, arguments, suggestions?
Yes, I do have a question.
Yes.
When I heard you talking, then the question came in me that means that I remember that I learned that כל החגים יתבטלו, but only Purim or something will remain. And then my question is, if so, then Tish Above should also remain as hoping for not as hoping.
So, Henry, very good question. First of all, we need to understand that medrash about Purim. Maybe if I'm invited, I'll speak before Purim, I'll speak about that. But Tish Above, we're going to have forever. Except it's going to change. It's what the Navi in Zechariah says, that the fast of the 5th month of the year, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, will become a day of Sasan and Simcha.
Sure.
Tish Above will always be an important day in the calendar, always, forever. Except its nature will change. It will be from a day of mourning to a day of joy. But even when it's a day of joy, it's a day to daven to Hashem that it will stay a day of joy.
That we say on the
Thank you.
Evel the Yom Tov, yeah?
Yeah.
On the Seder nights, yes?
So why wasn't that the case when the second Beis Mikdash was about?
Maybe nevuah that it was going to be destroyed. I don't know. We should be zeiche to real nechama.
Oh, mine. Thank you very much.
Oh my,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Rabbi, Rabbi.
The short quarter of an hour that I heard you enjoyed too. Thank you very much.
Sorry?
I said the short quarter of an hour that I was able to listen to your shiur, I enjoyed myself.
You can look at Facebook and you can